1870, 1880. On this corner, I believe it was the southwest corner of Clinton and Fate, which was then called Lancaster Street in Clinton.
Yeah.
There was a brewery. Of course there'd be a brewery. There's a brewery on every corner. There's a bar on every corner. Hey, no segue. This brewery here was called the Helldorfer. It was a man named Helldorfer, Sebastian Helldorfer, and had the Star Brewery. In the pamphlets that I held out, there is some reference to this. This brewery at the time encompassed like a whole block, and they had gardens and stables and beer gardens, and that's what these breweries did. They would basically draw the people in by having oompa houses every day, every weekend, whatever, and that's what did it. At the time, that brewery was producing in 1880 around 16,000 to 18,000 barrels of beer a year. That would make that brewery like almost the second largest brewery in Maryland right now. And that was just here. This wasn't even part of the city. There were only about, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 people living in this whole area at the time. So think how much beer they drank. These people were happy. Up the street here, where Sacred Heart Church now occupies, there used to be called Fort Marshall. And Fort Marshall was there during the Civil War. After the Civil War, the fort became defunct, and what became there was a brewery. Of course, it was called the Fort Marshall Brewery. Then years later, as Highlandtown began to grow and all the Germans wanted to have their own church, the Redemptorist Fathers got together and they built Sacred Heart Church, and that's what's there right now. Where I went to school and was crippled by nuns. That's what forced me to drink. Anyway, and other things. But anyway, so this was quite a historic. Now, where are you looking at these homes right here? I had my cousin's grandfather used to own a company here. This was called Manning's Can Company. It was a big company. I used to walk from where, if you were on the tour earlier, 3721 Fate Avenue, to my other grandmother that lived down the street in the 2900 block of Fate Avenue. And she used to walk at 60-some years old every day to watch us as kids. But we would walk by here, and this was the can company, Manning's Can Company. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve Fogleman, who's our liquor board chairman. Steve has a few things.
Here, you take this down. This is my corner. I live right there. So thanks for stopping by, everybody.
Are you going to invite us in for here?
I don't have that much beer. So the first thing about this corner that's neat is the fact that, as we were told about Sebastian Helldorfer's brewery, the interior beer garden was the place to be in the summer, where you stand above the lagering tanks while you drink your beer, all pre-refrigeration. When houses, after the brewery closed, and it closed, I believe, the same way Rob Kasper described a lot of these places closing, because the malt bill, pay for your malt in advance, and your product was lagered during the winter. And if something happened, like spoilage or something to your batch, the maltsters had a mortgage on your brewery, and that's how so many of them, including this one, I think, went down.
1899.
And when they put the houses up 10 years later, and continuing to this day, people like to dig out their basements. You know, they have these 5-foot basements in these neighborhoods. People ran into all sorts of trouble because they were hitting these giant lagering caves that were just a couple of feet under them. So these houses, a couple of feet under them, they still have these caves. They're still there. When this was the county, we had blue laws in the city, but not the county. So, and I learned this from the same materials that we're all using. So right up there on Eastern Avenue, 3200 block alone, was pretty much like what Cross Street is today. There were 30-some bars just on that one block alone, like 15 on each side. The other thing that's really fascinating about this neighborhood, is right where we are, is that I would say 1 out of every 15 houses brewed beer for money. Immigrants came here, they had a hard time finding a job, but they had no problem remembering how to make beer. And and they would sell it literally out of their basement windows for $1 a case. The expensive stuff was $1.20 a case. I would make it a nickel a beer. And so there were no less than 50 different brewers within a 5-minute walk in each direction. So they also succumbed to the same fate as the bigger breweries when they could not, for whatever reason, pay their bills. Somebody got into their hooch and there's never left to sell in the spring. Manning's Hominy Factory employed most of the women in this neighborhood. This factory extends halfway down the block to where all these new houses are. The building itself was raised in 2006, I believe. Went out of business probably in like 90. But my next door neighbor, who died a couple of years ago in her late 90s, worked here for 50 years, and they had no air conditioning, obviously, and this place became enormously hot in the summer, so they laid everyone off in the summer, and the women played cards and had the summer off and got unemployment checks, and then they all came back to work again in the fall. So they made hominy, and they made beans, and then they made, they got real crazy, and they did a combo of hominy and pork and beans. So I'm gonna, those of you who are interested, I'm gonna give you some of these labels. And they clearly say on them, Mrs. M. Manning Incorporated, 801-5 South Clinton Street here in Baltimore. So, and also, one last thing on Clinton Street, the beloved Hausner's Restaurant. It's just just 3 blocks up the street from here for so many years. It's ingrained in Baltimore's culinary history. Even if you had folks from DC like I did, they knew where Hausner's was. They didn't even know what Highlandtown was, but they knew where Hausner's was. So we also have some rare matchbooks to give you from Hausner's. It'll be worth something someday. So that's all I got, folks.
I only have,
Very cool.
I only have one thing to add about Fort Marshall, and that is that the Wiesner family he was a brother of the fellow that did this, the American Brewery. Some of you might have seen that over on Hillen Street. Some of us toured the Chestre, a dramatic piece of architecture. And he moved in, he opened the brewery in 1869, he died in 1870. Not so good. His wife remarried, and his son eventually ran the brewery, and as Dominic referred to earlier, the people out here, wanted to have their own fire departments and all that. He was the head of the volunteer fire department. And every time they put a fire out, they immediately went back to the brewery to celebrate. So they said they had the fastest fire crew in Christmas.
They started their own fires.
That is so
All right, thank you. Okay, so our next stop.
One more thing?
Yes.
Gambler. $10, $20, $30.
I laid 30. I think I got to drive on it. I might as well bet 30. I bet more of that on the This area know what it means, and it's the birthplace of beer in Baltimore, and that's why. I gotta save my voice because they had to sing later this week. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for making it today. I said blow me, but no, I'm just teasing. I said, delete that. Delete that. It's later. It's gone. Seriously. Baltimore Beer Week would be nothing without all of you.
That's right! You know it!
We just want to thank everybody for making it out today. We're ending here.
Oh, man.
We're ending here at Hudson Street Stackhouse, and if you look on the walls, they got a lot of history right
Yeah!
here. This place is great. Every place we've been has been great. I want to thank everybody that's been on the whole tour. If you made it this long, raise your glass. We thank you from the bottom of our heart, from Baltimore Beer Week, for being part of something that I think the people of Baltimore need. We need more positive things happening.
Yeah!
Drink beer. Dominic DeSantis, he's got a great person.
Dominic! Great name!
He's got a great name. I'm a little bit older, but anyway, Dominic, thank you for having us. Get the Dominic sandwich. It's good. Anyway, it's a great sandwich.